Welcome, I'm Kunle Oyedeji, and this is the Empowerment Group Presents. An interview with a man who is a singer, a model, a poet, and a mental health advocate. It's Rasharn Powell.
For me, I was raised in a certain way to unpack, to understand that emotional intelligence is of value.
Considering that there's a stigma, considering that it's not seen as the thing to do amongst the black community, why were you different? Rashawn,
Yes, sir.
some time ago you were asked in an interview to describe yourself in 3 words. Do you remember what you said?
I don't actually.
You described yourself using the words on the way. How would you describe yourself in 3 words today?
That's a very good question. For me, I'd probably say the exact same thing. On the way. Definitely further along. But I think there's this continuous journey towards being my best self. And sometimes you have to tussle with your worst self to get there too, so yeah, on the way.
I guess then if you're on the way, we need to identify where you're coming from. So let's talk a little bit about that. You grew up in Ilford,
Yep.
and correct me if I'm wrong, you were the only or one of a handful of black children in the school that you attended. What was it like for you experiencing that and also just growing up in Ilford and life as a child for you?
So growing up in Ilford was interesting. It was majority Asian, like an Asian community that I was surrounded by. Quite beautiful, to be honest. My grandma's like neighbors were Sikh, so we would experience their weddings and just so many different cultures, as time moved forward, which I think has really allowed for me to be who I am today. I would say someone that's pretty open to multiple different cultures and individuals. I think I thrive with that as well. And then moving into, secondary school, which is like high school, I guess. That was where I was really one of the only black individuals within my class, surrounded by, a lot of white Caucasian individuals. Interestingly enough, I didn't ever really experience racism or anything like that. I think there was this kind of admiration for where it is that I was from, I remember specifically them asking me questions around the slang that I would be able to say, which was just my usual vernacular. But yeah, there was like this reverence in a way. And then I think just based off of who I was as an individual, my own personal experience, I was on the rugby team, I was quite popular within school. I knew majority of people, so it was an interesting experience. But I do remember there was this one run-in with this kid who must have been in year 9 and I was in year 7. I was a kind of mouthy kid, I stood up for myself, I knew the value that I brought to the table. And I remember this time where he must have tried to X me out of a group of us speaking. And I was like, I don't know why you're trying to X me out. Like, all I'm doing is talking to my friends,
Sure.
You don't necessarily have to listen. I was quite lippy,
Sure.
And he obviously didn't like that. And I remember him then lifting me up as I was year 7, he was year 9, a lot stronger than me. Lifted me up and just cracked me on my nose.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, in that moment, obviously there's so many different things that you want to do. Like you want to punch that person, but then you're like, I don't know, I was always raised, to defend myself when it's necessary. I didn't really feel like there was anything that I could have done in that moment that would have stopped what had already been done. And I felt because of my my refrain from reacting, that he felt what he had done even more. I think I've just adapted to that being in life, you know. Like, I engage with martial arts, and it's, you know, it speaks about the whole energy of martial arts. Is the fact that, you know, you are able to fight, but you are so trained that you don't need to fight. You know, it's like ensuring that there isn't a need to go that far. So when I think back to that moment in time and like all these different things and teachers saying, oh, did he say anything like unjust to you? And obviously when I was a kid, I was like, what do you mean? Like, no, he didn't say anything. But then I was like, oh, you think he said something racist to me or da 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 da. You know, it did make me think about how did people see me or people that look like me. Because I know a lot of my other friends had completely different experiences, you know, that were black and in my school, especially some of my the black female friends that I had in school. Yeah, like a very, very different experience, which, yeah, I think just speaks to the way the black woman is positioned within society as well. But, you know, a deeper conversation also.
A lot of memories there that live with you today. Also, as part of your journey and your experiences, just picking up on a couple of words that you mentioned there. One of them being rugby,
Yeah.
another couple being martial arts. You also used the word refrain. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's also used in music. So was music always the plan? You seem to have had your hand in a few different things, which is typical of creatives. Was music always the plan? Did you think about perhaps pursuing rugby professionally? Did you go down the martial arts route recently or when you were younger? How did you come about your career today?
I'll answer backwards. Martial arts, when I was younger, I was doing karate quite consistently, and then I stopped for a while. Then I would dabble back and forth with, like, you know, the idea of doing like Muay Thai or something like that. And then over the last year, I started to get into Muay Thai and understand that. So, you know, that wasn't something that I was necessarily pursuing when I was younger. In regards to music being one of the avenues that I always wanted to pursue, from a young age, you know, I'd always been singing. I remember in year 3, reception, the whole of my primary years, at the end of school, we would always have these opportunities to do these recitals. And I remember I got my first solo performance doing Zac Efron from High School Musical.
Really?
Yeah, which was so interesting.
Interesting.
But also then why I think I didn't ever really see myself as not able to do something, you know, when I went to secondary school, even though I was around, you know, white Caucasian individuals, you know, I was like, well, I was playing a character that was posed as a white Caucasian individual, you know, in school, you know, and there was so many different other, you know, iterations of that within my younger life, my younger years. So didn't really ever look at life as there being any limits on it. I did want to pursue rugby. You know, I was really, really passionate about rugby. A part of me actually felt like there was a side of myself that I was able to unleash by being on the pitch. I was captain, so I had to, you know, abstain from certain outrages, I would say, you know, that maybe other teammates were privy to. Just
to
because,
lead by example.
Precisely, you know. You know, my coach, Mr. O'Hara, what a man, like literally would drill that into me, you know. He'd be like, remember who you are, you know, remember what it is that you represent. don't feed into that, you know. Because if I go, it's like, you know, the head, like if the head goes, then the body just goes everywhere, you know. And I think that was just trying to ensure that, you know, we stay as impactful as possible as a tight unit. But we were a really good team. You know, we went Southeast England finals and won, and all of these different things ended up taking place. So, you know, there was a part of myself that was like, okay, maybe that could be a journey. But then when I really thought about it, I was like, no, I really want to do music. You know, I really feel alive when I'm on stage. I feel like there's stories that I want to tell, and I've always wanted to write them from my point of view. Haven't ever really, apart from like songs that I really resonate with, like from artists that I'm really, really fond of. I've always wanted to tell my own stories. So, you know, I was like, well, maybe that's the journey that I go on. And I pursued that from like 16, like actually intentionally from that moment.
How did your parents feel about that? Parents typically play a significant role and part in the life of their children. How did your parents feel about you going down the career of music? And what was their influence on that?
It's interesting. I don't really ever feel there was any pushback. My mum, as well as my dad, had always really supported me. You know, they knew whatever it is that I put my mind to, you know, I'll be able to do. So, and I was always quite an academic kid anyway. So I would ensure that there was that, so no one could complain about when I was doing that. So yeah, there wasn't much pushback.
That's surprising, actually, because I guess speaking for myself, coming from an African background, and specifically my parents being Nigerian, there's a saying that growing up, you're either a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a failure.
Wow.
And typically it's like, get your qualifications,
Yeah.
stay on this path, have a backup plan, and so on and so forth. And I've heard it said that also for some of my friends, it's been similar with them in terms of coming from a Caribbean background, might not necessarily be the same professions, but it's kind of like the creative side is not always given the forefront and promoted because it's like a competitive field to get into. But you didn't have to deal with any of that.
No, not really. I mean, of course, you know, there was not necessarily maybe directly from my parents, maybe from other family members, there was some level of pushback. And, you know, when you say, you know, competitive, it's not just that, it's just a risk, you know, in general. But, you know, in my life, at least where I'm at now, is why would I ever choose to do something safe? You know, I think that there's a risk in everything, and I want to grow. I want to build, you know, to be able to build, to be able to thrive. You can't stay within the confines of what another person says that you should be doing, you know. I think it's like, what does my spirit say that I need to be? I have to follow that. I have to follow my instinct. And at times it may be scary, but why not? You know, regardless, we either learn or we win, you know, and it's whatever, you know, I think for me.
Taking that path sometimes can be scary. Like you said, it can be challenging. Would you agree that a lot of those challenges will be mentally?
100%.
You've also spoken openly about mental health challenges and also mental health challenges with people that are close to you, such as your dad.
Yeah.
You've spoken about him having bipolar. What was that like for you the first time you saw this come into play?
It's interesting because as a kid, I didn't know that it was bipolar. You kind of assume that they're just angry or they're just not themselves today, or you think there's something that you did wrong, you know, which is which is a very interesting take, actually, you know, and where therapy has really like helped me to understand, you know, certain things about myself and the way that I look at life. You know, I would say that a part of myself just felt a bit confused, felt a bit distraught, felt a bit hurt, and maybe betrayed, but betrayed in the sense of, I don't believe that you should be reacting in this way, yet you're reacting in this way towards me, someone that you care about. But also, I didn't have the understanding to really meet what it is that he was dealing with the level of compassion that I could meet it with now, you know? I think there's like this false truth that we move with about our parents that makes you think they're so high and mighty and they're superhuman and don't feel
Never make
anything.
mistakes,
Yeah, don't make no mistakes and
Yeah.
all of these different things. And then you get to this level in life where there's this equilibrium and you're like, oh, like, you're just like me.
Right.
You're just trying to figure it out.
Right.
There was no rule book of how to raise someone. And then you add on top of that what it is that my dad deals with, you know, bipolar, where there is these two states that you're in. And that's not, and those two states are not necessarily even who you are. So it's like you're battling with something that I can't even comprehend. A lot of my life, I was just trying to figure out whether there were certain ways in which I could ensure that that just didn't happen to me. Because, you know, there is a high risk when it comes to bipolar about, you know, it kind of being passed down. But I think as I stand here today, you know, I have so much love for my dad, you know, despite everything that he goes through and what he maybe outwardly shows to other individuals and myself. That man is like the wisest man I've ever met in my life. Like, honestly, if I have a conversation with my dad, I feel like I'm the smartest man just because I could hold it with him, you know? Like, he cares. And I think when we look at society and when we look at even other famous individuals that are dealing with similar things, people can't meet it with the same level of understanding because they hold a certain individual to a certain standard in the same way like how I held my father to a certain standard. If you do take a time to just step back and understand that, then it increases the amount of empathy that you can kind of move forward with.
You're a bit of a anomaly in the sense of you've experienced this directly, personally in your home. As a child, you've grown up and you mentioned therapy. I'm assuming this is something you have unpacked or are unpacking in therapy. I say you're a bit of an anomaly because there is a stigma within the Black community about Black people and specifically men, Black men, going to therapy. You could have easily have said, you know what, I didn't know what was going on as a child. That was then, I understand it now, and kept your life moving. Why did you specifically go to therapy? Considering that there's a stigma, considering that it's not seen as the thing to do amongst the Black community, why were you different?
It's a great question. What I would say, even to the latter part of what it is that you just said, is that that doesn't even enter my mind. You know, I think for me, I was raised in a certain way to unpack, to understand that emotional intelligence is a value, you know, it's something that you shouldn't be afraid of, you know, to speak about feelings, to have depth and seek depth in the conversations that you have with other individuals too. So for me, I experienced certain things in my life that I couldn't explain. Certain decisions that I'd made that I knew I shouldn't have made, but I did anyway. And then I started to like read more into like the anatomy of the mind, and like, you know, read individuals like Frantz Fanon and Carl Jung and Freud, and
You went there.
huh?
You went there.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to understand this. You know, they say, you know, it's really important for you to be able to understand yourself as well as other people too. And the only way to really understand people is, and yourself, is to understand the mind, because it doesn't really change that much in regards to what's being made up of the mind. So I like to read. I like to dive deeper. And I was like, it felt like I was unpacking myself in those moments. So I was doing certain levels of like personal therapy, I guess, journaling all the time, doing multiple like personality tests and all of these different things, which is so interesting. Actually, I heard something recently about personality tests, because obviously there is this notion of sub-personalities that we have. And when you are taking a personality test, typically the reason why you're like, and when you're posed with a certain question, like, am I a 3 or am I a 4? Or, you know, in certain circumstances, I'm like this. It's because your sub-personality shows up in those moments. And, you know, there's multiple selves that we actually have. So if you was to take a personality test, but take it as Kunle that shows up for the empowerment group, you'd probably be able to be quite decisive with answering a question or where you are at on a scale, compared to Kunle that shows up as a father or father to be, you know, or Kunle that shows up as a pastor, you know. I think looking at those things and understanding that even more for myself then was like, okay, cool, there's like so much more to unpack that it's really enthralling, that I was like, yeah, I want to go therapy. You know, I think I already have these deep conversations with my parents, and they don't have the understanding to unpack it for me, you know. They only tell me something maybe from a, you know, a spiritual space or an encouraging space. But I want someone that's like, okay, stop. Where do you think that came from? How do you think that adapts to your life now? Yeah, like, and, you know, allow for me to gain a firmer grip on my reality.
Talking about being on the way, your experiences and how you've gone about unpacking them. Would you say, is it fair to say that's the message behind your music? I know also that you're working on an upcoming project. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, really excited about that. I think my journey through everything that we've been speaking about really made it so important that everything I do say is very intentional. I think a lot of the time when writing music, at least from my past, even though you're feeling those things, it is just a feeling. You're not necessarily recognizing how impactful your words are on another person's life. Because, you know, it's like the death of the author. Once it's out there, it's not yours anymore. And I really believe that I can change the world with my actions, even if that's by just changing you, and then that multiplies the butterfly effect, you know. And it's like, or by what it is that I sing and say, you know, there's a healing process that takes place in that. And obviously it's been studied, but, you know, I think it's really the truth, and I feel that real elevation when I step on stage and I'm able to like really sing through things. So I was like, okay, I want to ensure that I communicate this journey that I've gone through and show the truth of it, you know, the bad, the ugly, as well as the amazing and blissful moments too. my key message is that anyone that listens to me or listens to the music that I make, if they are experiencing it, then they feel like they have some solace in the fact that I have been able to illustrate it from my personal point of view. And if they haven't yet experienced it, they knew Rasharn didn't lie to them.
The music that you're putting out, the art that you're putting out, the poetry that you're putting out, fantastic.
Thank you.
We know that there's greater to come, and you're sharing that message of your life and your experiences to people who may not have spoken about it but can resonate and identify with it. I'm sure there are some people listening, watching, who want to get to a place in their life where they can share their message, but they realize, actually, I need to deal with the mess first. But maybe they're a little bit reluctant to embrace therapy, embrace getting support, especially with the stigma in the community. What would be your message as someone who is on the way, who has gone through unpacking your experiences in therapy, now sharing your message to the world? What would your encouragement be to someone who finds themselves dealing with the struggle of, I need to unpack this professionally?
That's a great question. It's funny with questions like that because you never really want to give the, just do this, and because it really isn't that simple. Break it down to the simplest step. What's the simplest thing that you can do right now that will allow for you to get to the end goal that you desire to get to? If you desire to run a marathon, then maybe just putting your kit in front of you is enough today. And then maybe it's stepping outside and just running around the block. I think when you start to compartmentalize the journey, and it doesn't seem that far, because in essence, the only way that you get to the end is by just taking the first step.
Step by step. You look back at the end of your life, you look back at the end of your career. You started with being on the way. When you look back, what do you think will be the 3 words that you would use?
Thank you, God. Yeah. I just know that regardless of the amount of faith and work that I've put in, there's something bigger that's been controlling it all. And for me, it's really important that I acknowledge that. So yeah, thank you, God.
Rasharn Powell, thank you.
Thank you, Kunle.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share, and of course, stay posted for more.